Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Vision Series presentation at SIGGRAPH 2021 on recreating the past using visual effects in 3ds Max. I'm Kelly Ningwan, Industry Marketing Specialist at Autodesk, focused on elevating our 3D community and the amazing work that they do. I want to start by saying that during these next 30 minutes, time travel will be possible. You'll get to experience the Middle Ages, the 18th and the 20th century as you watch the real star of today's presentation, Thomas Berg, as he breaks down visual effects scenes from Olav, a Norwegian Viking documentary, in addition to a World War II and a Great Northern War documentary. Now, Thomas is a visual effects generalist based in Norway with over 11 years of experience working in visual effects and 3D animation. His work also spans across various title sequences, TV graphics, and industrial visualization projects. Now, without further ado, welcome, Thomas. How are you doing today?
Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much. I'm doing fine.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you. And before jumping into the presentation and probably having our socks knocked off our feet, why don't you start by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got started in 3D?
Yeah, so I'm 38 years of age. So I grew up in the 80s, like many other artists. And I grew up watching all the good practical effects and also the start of the digital effects. So from early age, I always been into computers and into more traditional filmmaking with cameras and more the practical part of it. So I did a lot of graphics and stuff, and then I worked many years as a mechanic. Actually, I went a little other way, but in the same time, I saved up a lot of money and had this plan of one day going into the visual effects business. So then I just bought 3ds Max and started learning it. And after about 1 year, I started working freelance full time because it was such a good way to learn a new skill and see how much possibilities I had inside the software. Because when I tried to do more actual movies, it required so much extra. You have to have lights, you have to have actors, you have to have so much stuff. So just being able to do all this inside the 3D software was, it was really mind blowing. And also the technology, I grew up with the technology and saw all the new benefits and all the new cool stuff that came out, and the computers were getting much more powerful, and also it was much more available for just a self-taught artist to learn all these things.
Wow. So you mentioned you're a self-taught artist, which honestly is very impressive just having seen some of your work. And there's a saying that actually goes, it takes 10,000 hours to master a skill. And as a 3ds Max aficionado, and yes, you absolutely deserve that title, have you put in 10,000 hours into learning 3ds Max? Or were there any resources and maybe even mentors that helped you master 3ds Max more quickly?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, actually, because I know I've probably spent almost the double of that time inside 3ds Max over the years, because it's so time consuming and so fun. But yeah, I've seen a lot of good some tutorials and on Autodesk area, and seen a lot of articles, and a lot of people are really good sharing their stuff. And that's one of the best parts of the whole thing, that you could start with just learning simple things like edit models and create simple stuff and learn more and more. And that way you your skill tree just evolves and you get to do more and more big stuff. So it's the best way I learn is to be try something I haven't done before and try to create it instead of just using a tutorial where I learn the steps. I always to try to recreate a effect from a movie, or just some place where I have to what's the correct word, hunt for knowledge, try to create it and go into the forums and see some tutorials. So
basically learning through failing almost.
The whole way. It's the best way, because if something goes right, you can't do the steps, but if you can't do something, you have to learn much more about it and learn the new methods. And that's the way I learn best. So I think that's the way I learn. And one thing I really like about working in 3ds Max is that you only have like the only restrictions are the time you put in and the skill set you have. So when you use those two and you like take the small steps all the way, it's easy to see progress. And after using 3ds Max for now about 11 years, I've almost lived in 3ds Max, and it's still so much I can't do. It's like I see new things every day that inspires me to learn more better workflows and just learn more stuff. And that's super inspiring to see that the software I used back then is the exact software I use now. And it's just my knowledge and like time that's the real difference here. So when you see some of the seniors present something online, you could like, you have the same software, you just have to put in the time and learn everything and be creative. And that's also a way I like to see it, because it's so easy to like think technical and everything. But the only 3 things I really think about when I'm working in 3ds Max is like creating something and learn in the process and develop as an artist. And this repeats itself. So you like do these steps and then you do it again and again. And then you could almost like a video game, just see your skills get so much wider, and you suddenly do like, it's really nice. And awesome. I'm not sure how to say it.
Well, it sounds like it's kind of like a cycle, right? And I can definitely see the passion. Like, it's not just time that you put into it. There's definitely some passion there as well. That's great.
It's and that's one thing I really like about seeing the community also, is like we all have this passion. So it kind of feel like before I used to skateboard back in the days, and you always push each other to get better, and you share the same like passion, and it's like an individual sport. You just want to be better and better, and when you see somebody that's way better, you get inspired to like learn those tricks and reach their level. And when there's somebody that's probably new to the game, you would like to learn them the new skills, because you see the passion they also have. Like, so it's such a nice and creative and just positive way of working. So I'm so thankful for being in this field.
Awesome. I love that, Thomas. Well, some of you at home probably have seen Thomas's incredible visual effects breakdown of Olav, that Norwegian Viking documentary that I mentioned before, that came out a couple of months ago, and it generated quite the buzz online. It even caught the attention of, the likes of SIGGRAPH. Now, Thomas, again, many probably know you as the mastermind behind the visual effects work in Olav, but tell us a bit about some other projects you've worked on.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of different kind of work. I do, in a year, I would say I do about 30% VFX and 30% like more like industrial animation for oil, gas, and aquaculture, because that's really big here in Norway. Like it's a lot of work in that field. And the last 40% is in broadcast and like more TV shows, and like do the whole branding, like the logos and everything from graphics to title sequences to on-screen graphics. I do a lot of some work for commercials and short movies also. That's but it's mainly like the biggest work is in VFX personally, and so I've done a lot of different things, and I think maybe I worked on around 40 different TV shows total.
Wow.
I think it could be a little higher, but I know in fact it's 40. So it's really nice, because some of them are like everything from a quiz show to science show to documentaries. Nice. And you also learn so much, especially when working inside like the oil and gas and aquaculture, because you have to take like really technical stuff and break it down into a 2 to 3 minute infomercial always. So you learn so much, and that's also a bonus in working in this field, that you get so much knowledge about things you never knew before.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you're pretty much a jack of all trades when it comes to, the world of 3D. And I actually have a follow-up question. So if you had to submit a portfolio of your life's work, but there's only room for one project, Which one would you include and why? Might be a tough one.
Yeah, but a part of me likes like the one of the first project because there was like the start of everything. But the project that shows everything, it has to be the Olav, the Viking, because I got to use like all my talents into one show. It was like one of those jobs where I felt I really like got to use everything I know and like put it into my, call it masterwork. Like yeah, it has to be that project. But yeah, it's probably that because it had so many new technical ways of working. And yeah,
I mean, yeah, I would agree that the work you did for Olav was just mind-blowing. And the fact that you did it all by yourself as a one-man show, that's truly incredible. Well, Thomas, finally, as the title of this presentation insinuates, a lot of your projects do focus on recreating the past using visual effects. What would you say are your best practices to ensure that your work depicts some of these historical events in the most accurate way possible?
Yeah, it's always about reference, like try to get as good reference as possible. And I'm quite lucky because the production company that hires me to do visual effects, they do a lot of historical like research beforehand because they have to like have everything correct. So I'm doing more the visual referencing, seeing like just like the Viking ships, find real Viking ships and see how they were, like the details, and just trying to find as much reference as possible. And also it's quite important to see like what's the visual quality going to be on. So I always see like TV shows that's in the same time era and like try to get as close as possible. But of course they are made by big teams, so they are more like much more it's a bigger show, so yeah. But it's references all the way, and that's also one thing I learned a lot of when you're doing totally digital scenes. You have to have some references to like know if something doesn't look quite correct. It's easier to know that these things are correct. So yeah, it's a lot of that. And
is it mostly like online reference, like research online, or do you even like, I don't know, go to museums as well and look at some artifacts, or is it mostly online work?
I wish it was more like going to museums and see the real deal, but for the most, it's like Googling images and like using internet and just watching it. But actually on the Second World War documentary, I went to Bodø, it's a town in Norway, and to a flight museum and saw the airplane I was working on.
Oh, nice.
And I'd already done most of the model, but it was quite nice to just see the small details and like get to know it better in those terms, because that's the cool part of this is like you research something so much and you learn so much about it that you like it's one of the biggest benefits is like you research real life to recreate it digitally. So you start to like appreciate everything so much. So when you see an old building, you see like textures, you see like how nature decays, and all these is things you use digitally afterwards. So it's a big bonus of working with historical things that you really learn about the history and see everything. Yeah.
That's so fun. You probably have a lot of fun facts when you go to parties, a lot of knowledge to drop here and there.
Yeah, probably.
Well, thank you so much, Thomas. I'll now actually hand the floor over to you for your presentation, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Kelly. So the topic is recreating the past using visual effects in 3ds Max. And there is 3 productions I'm going to talk about, and that's Alliert og Alene from Second World War, Dødsmarsjen 1719 from the Great Northern War, and Olav from the Viking Age. And these are all productions done by Ecofilm here in Trondheim. So we'll start with Alliert og Alene, or The Forgotten Fiasco as it's called in English. It's a 3-part documentary series about the invasion of Norway during the Second World War, and it was produced back in 2014. It was nominated for Best Visual Effects by Norwegian Broadcast Award Gulleruten, And it was a collaboration with another 3D artist by the name Einar Næss. So he uses Maya and I use Max. So most of the assets, layout, lighting, and render was done in Max. And he did all the animations and the dynamic tank tracks. So now we're going to see a short breakdown of some of the effects that was done. So when recreating the Battle of Fornebu on 9th of April 1940, it was primarily creating the Gloucester Gladiator and the environments, and on the Battle for Quam, it was creating the Panzerkampfwagen and integrating it into a live action plate. And when creating the Gloucester Gladiator, it was quite typical, using reference images and video and blueprints. And they also had built this part of the cockpit as a practical model for shooting plates, and that was also a really good reference. And here you can see a turntable. And this is done in 2014, so it was rendered in Mental Ray. And the clouds are actually done by using Scanline. And here you can see the pilot. It was done using photogrammetry. And in the scenes, since Einar did animation in Maya, he just exported the locators as a FBX, and I attached my planes as SIGGRAPHs to the locators. And that was a really good way to work, because if you updated the animation, it automatically updated the locators. And here you can see the scene inside Max. And for the propeller, I actually used a texture, a rotating animation, instead of using a mesh, because I didn't get the motion blur correctly. And for the clouds, I used plates that I made using Ozone, a plugin to Max. And I thought about doing it as a volumetric, but because of the render time, it just wasn't an option. So I rendered all the clouds using Scanline render, so it was really fast. And here you can see some of the reference images we used for modeling the Panzerkampfwagen tanks. And I also was on set as a VFX supervisor and took a lot of images and HRIs for recreating the reflections and lighting setup. And here you can see a shot of the tanks, and Einar did a really good job on the dynamic tank tracks. It looks really realistic. And that's a presentation of Alliert Alene. And now we're going over to the next project that's called Dødsmarsjen 1719, which is a documentary about the invasion of Norway, then it was called Denmark, during the Great Northern War that was in between 1700 and 1721. And the premiere is later this year. So for this project, I wanted to do a completely different style, and it's inspired by a Swedish artist called Alf Lannerbach. So it has almost like a hand-drawn look to it, and this was created using V-Ray and the Toon shader, and also by combining it with motion capture and cloth simulations, and adding a posterize time effect on top of this in After Effects to slow down the frame rate. And here you can see a shot where it's a 3D track, and it's a transition between the historical illustrations and the real life. And also here he talks about how the stories are just pen strokes in a paper, so it's a way to realize it. And that was a quite hard shot to track because of the snow was so white on the top. And here you have a transition between like going from illustrated to almost a realistic look, and then they fade out. So to do this, it's done by using first and foremost, motion capture using perception neuron, and then cloth simulations in Marvelous. And some of the shots are 3D tracked using PF-Track and rendered in 3ds Max using V-Ray and the V-Ray Tune material, and adjusting the frame rate to between 10 and 18 frames using the posterized time in After Effects. And here you can see the material setup. It's quite an easy material. It's just a V-Ray Tune shader with a blend map in a diffuse map that blends the texture from Marvelous Designer with pen strokes. That's just a texture I have. And the same with the highlights. And then you just use the specular ramp to adjust how much it's going to, how white it's going to be. And when rendering it out, I render out some separate passes for just being able to blend it in After Effects and create more of a snow or frost look on it. And as you can see here in After Effects, I have put on most of the layers there, and you can see it gets kind of this hand animated look. And when this is animated, it's even more of a look. So since that's still in production, that's all I have to show. But the next project, it's probably the biggest I've ever done by myself, and it's the Olav project. So we're going to look at that now. And it's a 3-part documentary series about the Viking king Olav Haraldsson, who became Saint Olav. And it's hosted by Kristoffer Hivju and his wife Grimolver Hivju. And the premiere was January this year. And it was nominated for Best Visual Effects by Norwegian Broadcast Award Gullruten. So now I'm going to play the breakdown reel, and it's about 3 minutes. So this was a really fun job with a wide array of different kind of effects. Everything from the attack on London Bridge to the Battle of SIGGRAPH down to Journey to England and enhancing scenes with the blood. So I'll go through some of them now. And starting with the layout scene of the London Bridge. It's assets modeled based on the distance. So the bridge and the boats have a much higher poly count than the background buildings. And all these are referenced into the main render scene using SIGGRAPH. And you can see most of the action is in the middle of the bridge. So I focused mainly that this was the place with the highest poly count and most details. And I also used Forest Pack for the background trees. And to tear down the bridge, I used TyFlow, super good for that. And just by having our own fracture and using physics, it was quite easy to make the bridge fall in a realistic way. And I exported as a tie cache, and here you can see. So the Vikings also pulled down the bridge. That's why some of the planks are breaking in the middle. That's because they attached ropes and pulled it. And when you have it finished, it's a tie cache file, and then I attach a lot of emitters with smoke and dust, and also make it collide with the water to have the impact of that. And here you can see the render scene with everything together. So there's a lot of different Phoenix simulations, and yeah. And for the Battle of SIGGRAPH, I used first motion capture using Perception Neuron. Then that data was exported and imported to Max, and I used Motion Mixer to make a blend between a T-pose and the animation so that Marvelous Designer can simulate it nice. And then it's exported back to Max again, and I optimize the models and try to keep everything in one point cache. So I use a skin wrap and a point cache. And here you have different kinds of level of details based on the distance to the soldiers. And they all use the same textures, and they just have a different point cache file. Use TyFlow for populating the crowds, and super easy, just use the shape and offset the animation and use a random material ID, and then you can create pretty big armies. And I think I used around 10 different textures on this. And here I have some blood tests, because I always try to create a preset and save that before I use it on an animated mesh, because it's much more difficult to see how realistic it is when it's animated. So by using PF track, I did a track of the face and used conform to make the wound go over the nose. And then just use the template and simulate it. So that's a good thing about using presets. It's quite fast when you first have it set up. And the next is a impact wound. And for this, I actually thought about it more like a practical effect. So it fills up first, like almost like a blood bag, and the spear goes through it. And that way it drags the blood along the spear edge. And it gives it more of a realistic look than just emitting blood, I think. So here you can see, and this is also hand animated because it was too shallow depth of field to track it. And here's one of the scenes where he first meets the war, and I thought it would be nice to improve the battle wounds. So I changed out the shield and added some blood on the clothes. So you can see the shield is just tracked in PF track and exported. And this also is kind of fast effect that gives a lot of, it changes the scene a little bit. And the blood was added in using Mocha in After Effects. It's a planar track. And that was the end of the presentation. And I know I went through a lot of topics really fast, so I hope you found it a little educational and entertaining. Big thanks to everybody that was watching, and also, of course, Autodesk for both inviting me and creating the software I use. So yeah, hope you have a great day, and thanks for watching.